once the cap table is messed up, it's very difficult to fix it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special series of episodes, which we are recording at GFTN Forum in Japan. I'm in Tokyo, which is part of the Japan FinTech Week. Joining me today is an incredibly inspiring young man. I'm going to use the word young definitely because he looks a lot younger than me, so I believe he is a lot younger.
I'm 43, by the way.
His name is Taejun Shin. He's the founder and CEO of Gojo, which I think a lot of you in Asia will be very familiar with, and also in the Middle East African region more recently. So, Taejun, welcome.
Yeah, please call me TJ. Yeah,
I'll call
Happy
you
to be
TJ.
here.
Welcome. Yes. I usually say welcome to the couch, which is what my usual show is, but this time I'll say welcome to the chair.
All right. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, that's why it's Couchonomics. Okay.
That's why it's
Couchonomics.
No, you got it. It's economics and couch put together. Right. There's a story behind that, which I'll tell you once we stop recording. So, Taejun, a little bit about your personal story, right?
Sure.
I was reading a little bit about it. Very inspiring. It mentioned you were born stateless.
Yep.
And you still carry a refugee travel documents.
Correct.
Just give us the backstory.
Okay. So it started even before I was born. So my grandparents came from southern part of the Korean peninsula, which was back then. So before the end of the war, it was part of the Japanese Empire. So they held the Japanese citizenship at that time. And then they decided to come to Japan for war, and then they settled here. The problem is that after the war ended, Japan gave up the sovereignty over the Korean peninsula. So my grandparents became stateless overnight. And the problem, additional problem was that then Japan came under the occupation of the US and the Korean peninsula entered another war. So no one stepped in to fix the issue. And then my grandparents' status became almost, the permanent. And in Japan, your nationality is determined by who your parents are. And by coincidence, I just inherited that status. So there are still around 30,000 stateless Koreans in Japan. And I have a permanent residency. So as long as I don't travel, it's okay. I don't feel like I'm a foreigner here.
Okay. So tell me, being stateless, carrying a refugee status, I guess it's not something you talk about every day, but it must have actually influenced the way you think, your career. Tell me how that has played out in you building this business and who you are as a businessman.
Yeah, surely. I think I'm very privileged stateless person. There are 10 million stateless people in the world.
Okay.
Like refugees people, and among them, I think I'm privileged. Still, since I was young, I have felt all these barriers to pursue my careers and etc. Because traveling abroad is always a big hassle. Although I travel quite often, at least every month. And when I was a college student, I actually wanted to be a human rights lawyer, which is sort of the natural choice, right?
Yeah, natural expansion.
And back then there was when I was a college student, there was a September 11 followed by the war in Afghanistan, and I also took the street to go against the war. That's funny because I was in Japan, and there's nothing that Japan was contributing to the situation, but somehow, with my friends, I took to the street, and then nothing changed for sure. And meanwhile, I worked with many human rights NGOs in Japan, and I realized that money is very important. So that's why I chose my career at private equity, and then I started my career at Morgan Stanley. Another reason why I'm very keen on financial inclusion is that my family was not so wealthy, and affording my higher education also was quite challenging. And anyhow, we managed to raise funds for my college and graduate school. And thanks to all these things, which is a support from my parents, relatives, and all the other peoples, thanks to them, I managed to enter, the higher education and started my career at private equity. So I believe in the impact of financial inclusion. And then after spending 8 years in private equity industry, I felt like, okay, I'm now financially independent. And I think I can take some more risk. And when I thought about what would be the good business idea, I thought maybe financial inclusion, microfinance, would be a good way because there still are many financially excluded people, especially in developing countries.
Okay. So you go from being a private equity executive to being a founder of a microfinance company called Gojo, right? There's an interesting statement that I read that, Gojo and company expresses themselves to be the private sector World Bank.
Yep.
Right. Talk to me around the thinking behind that.
Yeah. Thanks to my various activities when I was having when I was an investment professional at private equity, I was invited to a summer Davos conference of the World Economic Forum in 2012. That was when I was 30, and when I was 23 years old, I was determined to start my own business after turning 30, and I was looking for the business ideas, and then I attended this forum event, and Davos has a mixed reputation, but when I went there, I felt like, okay, this is like a private sector United Nations.
It is.
And then as a global shapers, and now I'm the young global leader. So we had a chance to talk with the founder, Dr. Shua. And then after talking with him, I thought that maybe I can start something similar, which maybe in the past only international organizations could think about. So to me, okay, let me create a private sector version of the World Bank, providing financial services for everyone in all developing countries. And that was the idea. And then I came back, spent 1.5 years on preparations, and started the company in 2014.
And who are you? So microfinance is huge, right? And underserved or financially excluded is actually quite a wide segment, right? So and you're in Japan, right? It's a very interesting underserved angle here too. Maybe we'll get into it, maybe we won't. So what was the initial segment? What were the initial regions? I know you said developing or emerging nations where it is. So where did you kind of focus initially?
Okay,
right.
Sure. Okay, so I have my side project for the supporting children under poverty here in Japan, but Gojo doesn't have any business in Japan. We have a holding company here in Japan, but our operations are in developing countries only. India, Cambodia, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Georgia, and other.
How many countries are you in now?
As of now, 13 countries.
13, wow.
Yeah, 13. And we serve millions of households there. India is the largest. So that's how we work, and our target customer segments are definitely the low-income households who live typically below like $3 to $5 a day.
Wow. What are the complexities with a business across so many different cultures, regions, jurisdictions, regulations? How do you guys cope up with it?
Okay, that's a good question. There are many challenges actually. Definitely, governance and regulatory management are two major challenges, I should say. Governance, in some from country to country, the governance standard is very different. But overall, in emerging economies or developing countries, people don't respect governance that much, at least compared with the major economies. And so it's always a big challenge, especially when we work with the founder-led companies. Sometimes we acquire the majority stake of the founder-led organizations. Then sometimes governance can be very challenging. And another headache always is the work with regulators. It's, let's say, quite often I fear regulators are reasonable, but sometimes they stick to a very unreasonable regulation. For example, we are still not listed, but we have 400 shareholders because we have many individual shareholders. And then once upon a time, we were asked to submit the non-criminal certificates of these 400 shareholders by a central bank. And then they said it's a rule. Okay, but I can't ask, that. And then we ended up spending like half a year to convince the central government to change their view. So
And I think that is the underlying issue, right? Like everybody talks about financial inclusion. I personally think a lot of parts of that the stakeholder group does lip service.
yeah,
I don't really think anyone really truly wants to solve for financial inclusion.
Mhm.
There are entities which that they do. I'm going to come back to that because I do want to talk about social impact,
Sure.
financial returns, and raising money. But we're in a fintech event. Technology is part of it today,
Yep.
right? How have you guys embraced technology to make yourself more effective, efficient, more importantly, impactful?
Right.
Right.
So for the last decade since we started a business, almost always our default ratio has been below 1%.
Wow.
And
Okay.
that's thanks to face-to-face interaction with our customers. So actually people quite often talk about AI credit risk modeling, but actually I have not seen the successful use cases outside of China. And China is an exception because they combined all the data sources, which is maybe the recipe for dictatorship or whatever. But anyway, in democratic countries, that cannot happen. So I have never seen any successful AI models in terms of credit risk modeling. And to us, the key thing is to have a face-to-face interaction. But technology is playing a big role in eliminating paper and eliminating cash, because these two items are huge, time waster, and they actually spend like 30, 40, paper and cash handling spend like 40% of the time of the field officers of our business. So we eliminated these two things. That's good enough. And then we call it phygital model, which is the combination of the digital transactions and the physical interaction.
I think that works, right? And I've got an example out of Central Asia where there's this interesting company which does very similar. They focus on the micro and small businesses.
Yep.
They have 400 relationship managers across the country,
Right.
right? But at the same time, they have a credit underwriting system which is sort of AI enabled, and I think that model keeps their delinquency rate. Specifically in the question, how expensive is it for you to acquire customers, or do you think that the audience is so much in a need that actually cost of customer acquisition is not high?
Right. Customer acquisition cost, once we calculate it, it's like 10 cents per person. Because, let me explain the reason. Okay, so whenever we find customer, what we do is we have a branch, and each branch has these field officers. Their salary typically starts from $200 if they are college graduate. And what they do is to visit villages and then talk with village chiefs to convene a meeting of the villagers. And there will be like 50 villagers attend. And so spending one day, this field officer go there and make a presentation. If you make a presentation to 50 people, perhaps 100 people apply for the loans, because not only the participants of the meeting, but also the neighbors of the meeting participants will also apply for the loan. So in just one day, you can acquire 100 customers. So customer acquisition cost in this segment is extremely low. And actually, we also try to do the digital, customer acquisition, and we also provided app-based digital loans, where customer acquisition cost in India was like $30 to $50. And okay, it might look cool, but it doesn't make money. So actually having humans in the field would be much more cost efficient and effective way.
All right, there we go. That's the death of agentic AI. Right. But on a serious note, right? So a couple of things. Regulators. Regulators don't make life easier. What can regulators do more?
There's a good question. I think it's great if they have the universal framework everywhere in terms of, say, foreign capital regulations, etc. Because everywhere we go, the central bank asks for the different set of information, and that's very difficult to handle. In one country, it's criminal certificates. It's in one country, I think we needed to submit the bankers' reports.
But TJ, is that ever going to happen? Regulatory harmonization, we've talked about before you and I even entered business, right? If anything, I see greater disharmonization, right? Even neighboring countries, part of the same economic bloc. I think Europe is a bit of an exception. I think they do a wonderful job. But vast majority of the world, we're not seeing any harmonization.
Yeah, I should admit that you're right. And I thought it's like the question about the magic wand. If you have the magic wand.
We'd all love a magic wand. We'd all love a magic wand. But let's talk about incrementalism.
Sure.
What are the little things, especially with countries which have large financial inclusion challenges, right? What is it that they can do more?
I think it's nice if they have some personal exchange between the central banks and the major banks, such that they can understand more about the private sector. Especially in European countries, I think still bureaucrats are the most prestigious job. So people go to the central bank and then just they go up the radar inside the central bank. They seldom go abroad, so they go outside of the central bank. So that's something maybe we can change. That's maybe the one thing that I can.
Let me bring another part of the stakeholder ecosystem into the question. The big major banks, right? The ones with the massive balance sheet, the big customer bases.
Yep.
Right. Two questions. Do they have to come to the party to make financial inclusion a reality at scale? Right. I'm sorry, three-part question. Secondly, in the markets that you're in, are you now starting to see these banks come to the party in partnerships with firms like you? And what more can be done to get these banks to really walk the talk, as they say, around financial inclusion?
Yeah. So these major banks, for example, in India, these major banks are our lenders. And in India, there's the something called the priority sector lending, which is that banks balance sheet that at least certain percentage should be for the low income households. So for that purpose, they lend money to us. That is already a great thing. I don't know whether it is a good idea for major banks to directly enter this segment, because the skill set is a little bit different. So they might have a subsidiary dedicated to microfinance or financial inclusion in the rural areas. But I think that's the best way for them to go.
So you're saying be a banking as a service provider, provide your balance sheet, provide sort of compliance covers, so on and so forth, because they do have balance sheets, right? And and unfortunately or fortunately, you guys need that.
Yeah.
That leads me to my next sort of segment, which is the investors, right? So the primary purpose of your goal is social impact, right? It's social impact with a clear consideration that you have to make money, right? But you don't make, I'm assuming, outlandish profitability, right? Because then it sort of borders on exploitation. And having sort of studied in the US, I saw what payday loan companies do, which is, grotesque, if I may use that word, right? So how are you attracting these investors, not just beyond the priority lending, which the banks have to force themselves to lend? How do you attract these investors? Do the investors truly, genuinely believe in the social impact side, or are they still coming in terms of give me the financial returns and then we'll speak to you?
Right. So cumulatively, we already raised more than $300 million. And as of today, even venture capital and private equity account for just 25% in terms of the ownership. And I have done this quite deliberately because I was lucky, because I came to this segment quite late. Microfinance started half a century ago. And I was able to learn from the mistakes of the others. And I had a chance to talk with, for example, a person called Vikram Akula. He's a founder of SKS Microfinance, which once was the most successful microfinance institution in India. Did an IPO in India Stock Exchange for the first time. And he told me about the importance of capital structure. So I have been very careful about it. And what I did actually was, for the first 3 years since its establishment, I have raised funds from angel investors only. We have raised $15 million USD from angels first. Then I started tapping the Japanese corporates whose mandate is not to lose money. As long as they have the return of the money, they're happy. So then I tapped them, and then also DFI, so the government-backed entities, and then venture capital, private equity. I had a very specific pecking order in terms of fundraising, because that's in my opinion, the most important way for a company to achieve double bottom line. To me, cap table is like election system in democratic countries. Once the cap table is messed up, it's very difficult to fix it.
So you've raised 300 million.
Yep.
Do you think that capital structure and strategy works for you to get to 3 billion?
Oh, that's a good question. And then that's what I have to really think about. And lucky thing is that I'm in Japan, and I would say that Japanese investors even commercial investors are most patient investors. And perhaps I think it's thanks to very low interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
Now it increased a little bit, but in Japan, people are quite okay with say 10% IRR. That is not the case outside of Japan. Right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So that is a good thing, because then we can access the lower cost of capital here, and we are thinking of leveraging as much as possible. But at the same time, we have to make certain profit while making a social impact. And then just recently, I had some enlightenment, which is for a microfinance company to be very impactful, we have to satisfy three things. One is sense of mission, and second is innovative mindset. And then third is position as a market leader, the scale. Because without scale, actually nothing works. And thanks to scale, biggest financial institutions in general, they always enjoy better profitability. And then thanks to that better profitability, they can hire people for CSR-like projects. For example, in Japan, mega banks still maintain branches for senior people. And then they have these branch tellers, etc. And they are hardly making money. But in terms of financial inclusion, Japanese mega banks are the most impactful players. And then I feel like we can say the same thing, for example, in Bangladesh. These three major microfinance players in the country are, thanks to the scale, they're the biggest player in terms of financial
Ramin is
inclusion.
quite impressive too. So it's quite interesting. So you are bringing Japan to the world.
That's correct.
In a roundabout manner. And I think that's I think building bridges, building corridors is a key theme here.
Yeah.
Right. I'm cognizant of time. A couple of last questions. I want to quickly ask about the expansion in Africa, right? It is through an acquisition.
Yep.
Talk to us a little bit about Africa. What is the intention out there?
Right. All developing countries are quite bumpy, full of many conflicts. But I feel like finally some countries started to pick up the speed. For example, Cote d'Ivoire, the Ivory Coast, and Senegal, the two, the great countries. And I think many countries will enter the same phase. And we all know that, the frontier in terms of growth would be Africa. And I think in the next decade, Africa will see a transformative moment. And I'm very looking forward to seeing that.
Okay. 5 years from now, where will Gojo be?
Our plan, actually, to be the private sector World Bank, we have to be in at least 50 countries, at least serving 100 million households. So 10x, at least 10x growth from today.
You're going to be a busy guy.
I still have time for, riding,
running
Brazilian
marathons,
ultramarathon. Yeah.
So are you climbing mountains too?
Actually, I have a plan to go to Mount Everest in the future, but for the time being, maybe our board will say no.
Yeah, well, I can understand that. TJ, thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Arjun.
I really appreciate you taking out time. I think it's a wonderful experience. If you're ever in the Middle East, do give us a call.
Yeah, definitely.
It would be a pleasure to meet you. And actually, I'd love to introduce you to some of what I call the mission impact startups, because we're starting to see more and more of them. I think, you'd be a great source of inspiration for them.
Lovely.
So appreciate you coming in.
Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, that was Taejun Shin, or TJ. who's the founder and CEO of Gojo. Inspiring story. I'm sure you'll all enjoy that or enjoy hearing it. So with that, I'll say goodbye till the next one. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.